Welcome to the Pharmacy Leaders Podcast with your host, Tony Guerra. The Pharmacy Leaders Podcast is a member of the Pharmacy Podcast Network, with interviews and advice on building your professional network, brand, and a purposeful second income from students, residents, and innovative professionals.
Hey, welcome to the Pharmacy Leaders Podcast. It's been a tough week, and I wanted some time to kind of think about things, and I'll talk about certainly AACP, ACPE, and NABP, the NAPLEX, and kind of talk about what's going on with that. But the first thing I wanted to do is kind of give you a place to go if you are thinking about a residency. And this is available to everybody. It's not like those journals that are hidden behind the walls of the associations. The AJPE, or the American Journal of Pharmaceutical Education, you can get to right away. And there's a recent article, it's volume 83, issue 4, so 2019, the most recent one. And it's called A Screening Tool to Identify Qualified Pharmacy Residency Candidates. And what you want to look at is, for many people, I'm sure it's TLDR, too long didn't read. But I'll tell you what's most important here. If you look at Table 1, it says domains included in an electronic scoring tool used to screen applicants at 2 hospital-based pharmacy residency programs. What they're basically saying is that there's so many applications and so many people applying that we need some way of scoring them and giving them points and then seeing if those points in some way correlate to getting an interview. And they showed that with everything except work experience, it did correlate. So what also is very telling is the scoring ranges. So here are the 6 domains. So community service, leadership experience, letter of intent, letter of recommendation, presentations and publications, and work experience. So what they're basically saying is that the higher you score on the first 5, everything except the work experience, the better off you are in terms of your chances to get the interview. It didn't say, I don't think, that you got the residency. It's just saying, you take that next step to the interview. And of course, Brandon and I wrote that book, 100 Strong Residency Interview Questions. You can get the audiobook or whatever on Amazon if you want to kind of start seeing what are the kinds of questions you need to be able to answer and how to answer them. But what this does is it tells me that you really have to choose whether or not you're going to go to residency or you're going to go and try to get one of the community positions, because the scoring range is very telling. The most valuable thing that this, and again, this is for these 2 hospitals, it's not like nationwide, but it's the sentiment of many places that leadership experience is the most important thing that you can possibly have. So being president of an organization, and there's other ways to do it, other positions, you don't have to be national president of something. But they give that one 4 points, which is more points than any other domain. The other 3 are letter of intent, letters of recommendation, and presentations and publications. The letter of intent I talked about last year, and how many people completely plagiarized that UCSF one. And I don't think their intent was plagiarism. Rather, I think their intent was, oh, that looks like a template. I'm just going to use it as a template, and then I'm going to, put in my information. However, a good letter of intent is the story of why you want to do that residency and how it should naturally fit. And I wouldn't take the letter of intent as one of those last minute things that you have to do, rather something that you're kind of writing as you go through, especially for those of you in APPE's Block 2 or wherever you are. The letters of recommendation you don't have quite as much control over, especially if you need to get a specific one. So for example, if you're going to be doing critical care and you have a critical care APPE, it's obvious that you should be getting the recommendation from that person. Those both get 3 points. And then presentations and publications. what I would do is, a number of you are saying, look, I'm not going to have anything published, certainly by the time that I'm going to be a resident or applying for these residencies. I wouldn't discount digital publications. Uh, they just in some way want to know that you care about the research process, that you understand the research process, that you're not going to be a burden to them. And I'm not talking about the people that wrote the article, I'm just saying in general. But they don't want you to be a burden to them because they want you to be able to prepare a presentation and show evidence of it. And also, are you, I hate to say a good writer because you don't have to be, you can have people edit it, but have you taken writing seriously? So the first one is leadership experience with 4 points. The letter of intent, a single one-page letter, gets 3 points, and Brandon Dyson talks about this all the time. Letters of recommendation, looks like they get 3 points as well, and then presentations and publications. What is a real concern is that community service and work experience both get 1. So a lot of times, community service is just kind of something you do. Maybe you have something back home, or you've just found something that's really important to you. But in terms of going to a residency and remember, you're being employed. A lot of people keep thinking of it as more school. No, it's a job. So they appreciate that you're doing community service, but they really care a lot more about your ability and leadership. What is really a little bit surprising is that the work experience only gives you 1 point. Now, again, this is just this Providence St. Peter Hospital in Olympia, Washington, but that is an absolute deal killer for many positions, because what's happening now with the retail landscape is that there are many positions that are not available to new grads. Even to somebody that's only had maybe 1 or 2 years of staffing, they really want somebody that's either been a manager, and it doesn't necessarily have to be in pharmacy. Maybe you were a store manager, an assistant manager before your pharmacy life. I know many have that. But they want that kind of work experience. So you're really drawing the line. If you decide to kind of forego a significant amount of work experience to go all in on the residency, you've basically discounted your ability to get a job as a community pharmacist. The expectations are so high right now of a new grad in community pharmacy that you'll be able to pick up right there, get moving, and they expect many years of service, likely with that same company, especially with what happened recently. So again, I recommend this article. It's a screening tool to identify qualified pharmacy residency candidates, and it's extremely well written. And if you really don't have time to read it, just go to Table 1, kind of take a look at what the domains are that they're going to be judging you on. And then, of course, we talk about them in the book, 100 Strong Residency Interviews, questions, answers, and, of course, rationales. Another article that's in there, and it's not actually an article, it comes from Lucinda Main, and let me get back to the home where it is. And she has a 3,000 word response, and I'm nerdy English major, so of course I read the whole thing. And basically kind of responding for the record about the petition, the Halt New Farm Deaccreditation to 2030. And let me talk a little bit about that, because it is, as she says, it really isn't that simple. But as I kind of read through it, and she makes a case, a very good case, that we've been going with the flow. They said we needed more pharmacists. We created a thing where we have more pharmacists. And what I couldn't find, and maybe I just missed it, is that at the very end, she says or writes that pharmacy began to experience a flattening in the number of applicants around 2010. And over the last several years, both the number of applicants and applications applying through PharmCast decreased. That's absolutely true. The applications have taken a dive, and most students and I'm just rounding up to around 3, it's a little bit less than that, but most students are only applying to 3 schools. And the applications are sort of important. They are most important for the small, I want to say this right, for the small private that depends on students coming from far away. In my own experience, I've been, pre-pharmacy advisor for now 11 years, and I'm probably one of the only people that has significant face-to-face contact with freshmen, sophomores, juniors, sometimes seniors, that are going into and applying for pharmacy school. What I hear over and over again is they don't think of it as they think of it as just as you would kind of move on to the next step at the same college. Most are not looking to move far, and they're certainly not looking to move out of state. Some are looking to stay, move within the region. So the Midwest, for example, in Iowa, we get students from Chicago, Minnesota, Wisconsin, and so forth. But it would be rare for me to see a Californian, for example. Where in Maryland, we had the opposite. Like Californians would come to us, and we would get people from all over, but also a lot from Maryland. So she says the applicants and applications have decreased, and that's true. That's true. So she's saying, good times are ahead. Pharmacy is not alone in this experience, and the downtrend of applicants as well. Well, that's true, but the last cycle for medical school, they accepted 41%, and the last cycle for pharmacy school, they accepted 82.7%. And that's the real problem. It's not that enrollments are down a little bit. It's that the last 4 years, pharmacy schools accepted 1,000 more students as the applications went down by 1,000, increasing from 77 to around 82.7% that the number of people coming in. So that's one of the big issues. The other big issue comes from ACPE, which is the one that governs them. And I've seen all the boards, and obviously there's complaints about the salaries over at ACPE. Basically, the way accreditation works is each school has to pay, and I just kept thinking of Braveheart here, an annual duty to the accreditors to maintain their accreditation and so forth. And I don't know if it's annual or they, break it up by the number of years they're accredited. I have no idea. All I know is that the public information is that ACPE made $4 million last year, 1.2 million or 1.1 million of that went to 6 executives. So 1/3 of all revenue from that ACPE, the accrediting body, makes goes to the 6 senior officers. And I can see why people are upset about that. Like, so what's going on that they make so much money? And it's a couple hundred to 350, something like that, $1,000. And I think what the real concern is that the ACPE is using, and I'll talk about the Peter Vlasis letter in a minute. I think it was Drug Topics that had the letter, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But so here's this money going from the schools to the accrediting body, and then they're hoping the accrediting body says, "Hey, we can slow down the accreditation or something like that," and they're saying, "No, we can't." But the big concern is whom they accredit. So if you want to look at the data, the NAPLEX scores, you can see that there's like 134 schools or something like that on the last NAPLEX scores. And if you look at the 4 newest schools graduating and taking the NAPLEX for the first time, those 4 scores are in the bottom 20 of that 134. Now, you say, well, they're in the 60s and 70s, and a lot of times what people do is they'll make them like grades, like an A is 90 to 100, a B is 80, and so forth. What you really want to do is give them a class rank. So if it was a class rank, these would rank in the bottom 20, 25% of the class. And that's what the real concern is that, okay, you've said you're going to accredit these, and one of those Second to last, I think, got full accreditation. So exactly what are you doing with accreditation that somebody can have a NAPLEX score that to us looks like it's really bad? And I understand exactly where students are coming from, because they say, look, if my grades were like that and my grades were in the 60s, I wouldn't be able to continue to the next year. Why can a pharmacy school continue to the next year? And I understand their grievances with that. So uh, basically, what the accrediting body is saying is that we, and the title of his viewpoint was PharmD quality versus quantity, and that they're focusing on quality. But the retort, and that's his claim, is that they're focusing on quality. But what we're seeing is that the outcomes that we can see, because we can't see all of the other things, all we can see is these NAPLEX scores, that the NAPLEX scores are very low. So how could someone get full accreditation being in the bottom 25% of the class, right? So if you're in the bottom 25% of the class, you wouldn't get into a college and so forth. So that's the big concern, is that schools at that 82.7% acceptance rate are accepting people that they shouldn't, and so forth. But the big question that I always had was, I don't get it. We've gone from, mid 30s, about 35% acceptance rate, like a decade ago, and it's slowly creeped up to this 80 something percent. How are the NAPLEX scores not that much lower? Like, they are really low at some schools, but if you look at the trend, they're not that much lower. And I don't know the answer to this question. I want to make that very clear. But if you look at the NABP and the NAPLEX, only 200 of the questions count. The other 50 questions are test questions. And those test questions, and this is all assumption, tell me if I'm wrong, but those test questions are meant to make it fair. So if, maybe there's a question on there and 2 people out of 15,000 got it right, they can't use that question. It's just unfair. Or maybe there's a question that 14,000 out of 15,000 got it right. Well, that might be a little too easy. But this was my concern. And I think something that NABP I don't think they could have ever predicted this. But and follow me on this one, if the practice questions are meant to create this kind of fair medium, like, a question people should get 75% of the people should get the question right, or something like that. Maybe that's their marker, or whatever it is. If you do that each year, that means the NAPLEX would have been getting easier every single year from the time that schools started taking a higher and higher percentage. So my hypothesis is, and the way to test it is something that I can't imagine them doing, but to go back 10 years, get questions from the NAPLEX back when pharmacy schools were accepting 35% of the applicants, get the questions that are still relevant to practice today, put them in the NAPLEX, and see how students do with those questions, to see if it's really still, if it was harder back then. Going up, the way that, your parents talk about going to school. Yeah, I went uphill both ways to school, And I just don't know, but my feeling is that it's possible that the NAPLEX actually got easier. If that didn't happen, then what explains this rise in the NAPLEX scores? Well, I'm seeing on the boards, and I don't know if this is true or not, but there was complaints that the school was not allowing someone to graduate because they didn't do their NAPLEX studying that they were supposed to do, and there's some kind of online NAPLEX preparation that they're doing. So I understand if it matters so much for accreditation and so forth, that NAPLEX scores need to be high. If it matters for enrollment and things like that, then NAPLEX scores need to be high. You're going to do that. Although there's just a weirdness that you're telling 23 to 45-year-olds that well, if you don't do your homework, you're not going to graduate, and that's it. That's that, and you have to study for the NAPLEX, or we're not let you out of here. That's a little goofy. So to kind of summarize everything. more people are going to apply to residency because it's a heck of a lot easier to get a residency. And we can, and I saw kind of a back and forth on one of the message boards. No, 50% got in to residency. No, it was 60%. And the 50% comes from the number of people that enrolled, and some people leave the residency match because they got a job and they're like, well, I'm just going to take this job. I don't necessarily want to do a residency, or I thought I wanted to do residency, but I kind of feel I was being pressured into it. I really don't. But many of those are, I never got an interview. So how am I going to rank anybody? And so I personally believe, and this is my personal opinion, that the match rate of 64% is artificially inflated. I think it's closer to 50-50. When you get to that 64%, it's just saying that if you got an interview, then your chances are probably 2 out of 3 that you're going to match for a PGY1. So that's why it's so important now, especially if you're P4 now or in your last year of pharmacy, if you're one of those 3-year schools, that you are absolutely looking at those check boxes and saying, I'm not going to go to UCSF's website and copy word for word their letter of intent. I'm going to carve a story that tells about why I am doing a residency, why I am looking for this particular type of residency, and how I am qualified in the leadership, in research with the posters and presentations and so forth. As far as AACP, I know they're having their meeting next week, and I know there's been lots of talk about the greedy pharmacy schools, and I think the way to look at that is, first of all, a pharmacy school is an entity. It's not a person. It can't be greedy. But most of the people going to that meeting are not going to be in the pre-admissions workshop. So the pre-admissions workshop is helping those people in pharmacy school get their numbers up, matching revenue, all the things that you don't generally associate with pharmacists that makes most people even uncomfortable to talk about. So that admissions part of it is a bunch of people saying, well, hey, our numbers were down. This is what we did to get people in our school, and so forth. But the majority of people are just trying to connect with other people, just trying to get better at teaching. So if that's something you're thinking about going to, I understand it's a great event. It's out in Chicago, but I will never be in the academy. I'm not a school of pharmacy person, but I think that it's valuable to see what other people are doing, how they're doing it, and that there are a ton of people that certainly care about the students going into pharmacy school. And that really, and I thought about this too. I was like, well, how would your professor know that you are employed or unemployed? How would your professor know what you did? Now, at graduation, what some schools do is they say what the person's going to do. So if they're doing a residency, they say, okay, they're doing a residency at somewhere. And then, it's kind of funny, but, and then there's those residencies like Cleveland Clinic or Mayo where, there's this kind of hush through the audience and they're like, oh, you got one of those, or Hopkins or whatever it is. And, you see, okay, so that's where people get applauded is for being a resident and getting those tough to get residencies. And then there's the, certain person that's got a job, but then there's the person who's interested in employment in certain areas. And that's where I really kind of looked back at my graduation and kind of thought of it. And I don't think we ever talked about where we were working. We just were all going to go get our jobs at Giant Food, which is a grocery store in Maryland, or I was going to Walgreens, and it just was we all had jobs. It was residency and all that stuff was just not a thing back then. We were the first PharmD class, so that kind of additional the PharmD itself was a 2-year add-on to the bachelor's degree. And only 20 of the 100 people that graduated every year would do it. So it was a completely different world back then. But I don't want to lose what my point that I was making is that I think most of the professors and most of the people at AACP are trying to do a good job. But it's clear that some schools are accepting a ton of students, and it's making everybody look bad, because as the applications are going down, like Lucinda Main said, these schools are just picking up 1,000 extra applicants that came in, and nothing's changing in terms of the graduation rate. So I think it was 13,000 4 years in a row. So you can expect that. And then you have to add the non-farm cast, which is about 1,500 or 2,000 more. So expect classes around 14,000, 14,500 for the next 4 years. That's not going to change based on the data, unless there's some deep change in attrition. But there's a reason why pharmacy students don't quit, and I don't. I'm not even gonna touch that one, not at all. And then ACPE, I think Peter Vlasis is retiring. There was a retirement note. There's some kind of invitation-only event, so he's going to be gone. So those of you that are angry at ACPE and all that, we'll see who his successor is. And I'd be kind of interested to see if that person sticks with what he said in that drug topics viewpoint opinion, PharmD quality versus quantity. And then the NAPLEX, I just would love to know. I wish somebody would do that. I wish somebody would put, maybe make 10 of those questions out of the 50, retro questions, if you want to call it that. Let's see how these students compare to past years. And I would love to find out. I mean, maybe they're much better. Maybe they're much better trained. So much more clinical experience than we had, than the bachelor's degrees had. And I just don't know. I would just be interested to know. Anyway, I kind of went a little long with this, but definitely check out that article about how they grade you, and start working towards making sure that your letter of intent, that the people that you're trying to get recommendations from, and that your presentations and posters, and don't discount digital publications. It's better having something than having nothing. And being able to say that, hey, I did do a couple of podcast episodes, and this is what I wanted to do. I did this presentation. Maybe it was local, but I understand the research process. It's pretty clear what you need to do to check the boxes off to get to that interview stage. And then we, with the book, will help you with those interview questions. So, again, I'm always happy to kind of respond. I'm all over the place, but Tony PharmD1 on Facebook, if you want to get me that way. I do respond to emails, but nobody really seems to do that. Twitter, I don't really do too much of anymore. And just hit me up, and I'll try to help you if I can. But I really think that it's really going to be tough, because you're being asked to do something which no other class has ever had to do, which is be the best candidate for a residency at the same time you're trying to be the best candidate for a job outside of residency. And they've made clear that work experience in retail has very, very, if none, relation to your possibility of acceptance to an interview. Yet it's so important that you're working if you're going to even think about getting a job in community, because if you're not working for that company, they have other people that are already, and that are going to be way ahead of you in line. So good luck to everybody, and I always love to hear from you.
Support for this episode comes from the audiobook Memorizing Pharmacology, a relaxed approach. With over 9,000 sales in the United States, United Kingdom, and Australia, it's the go-to resource to ease the pharmacology challenge. Available on Audible, iTunes, and Amazon.com, in print, ebook, and audiobook. Thank you for listening to the Pharmacy Leaders Podcast with your host, Tony Guerra. Be sure to share the show with the hashtag #PharmacyLeaders.